You've probably heard the story a million times, right? Robots are coming for our jobs, and they're making society more unequal. But what if the real story is a whole lot more complicated and, honestly, a lot more interesting?
I mean, it seems like an obvious yes, doesn't it? The more automation we have, the more people in certain jobs get displaced, and the wider the gap gets between the rich and the poor. But is that really what the data shows?
Yeah, the common story is pretty simple. Robots are fantastic at doing the same thing over and over again. So the workers doing those routine jobs, they get replaced, their wages get pushed down, and boom, inequality goes up. It's a clean, simple narrative that makes a lot of sense on the surface. Okay, so this is where it gets really weird. Take a look at this. The data here from nearly 2 decades in the US shows something puzzling. On one side, you see robot installations just soaring. No big surprise there. But then look at the other bar. The share of inequality that happens inside the very same job is actually going down. That is the complete opposite of what you'd expect.
So that's the big question, right? This is the central mystery we're going to unpack. If robots are taking over, why is this huge piece of the inequality pie actually getting smaller? To figure this out, we've got to dig a little deeper.
So to solve this puzzle, we first need to realize that not all inequality is the same. There are actually two very different kinds of it. And understanding that difference, well, that's the key to the whole thing.
And check this out. This is why it's so critical to make that distinction. A whopping 75% of all the wage inequality out there doesn't happen between, say, a CEO and a janitor. Nope, it happens within the same exact line of work. This is where the real action is when it comes to pay gaps. So let's just break this down real quick. On one hand, you've got between occupation inequality. That's the wage gap between totally different jobs, like an automotive assembler compared to a salesperson. But then you have within occupation inequality. That's the pay gap inside the same job, like the difference between the most experienced, top-paid assembler and a new person who just started. All right, now that we've got that straight, let's get to the really surprising part, the wild double effect that researchers found when robots show up on the factory floor. Okay, so get this. The research found that when a workplace adopts more robots, the wage inequality inside a specific job actually drops. And not by a little bit, by a solid 16%. The gap between the highest paid and lowest paid workers doing the same thing gets smaller. But, and this is the huge twist, at the exact same time, the wage gap between different occupations goes up by 7%. So the gap between that assembler and that salesperson, it gets wider. So you see what's happening? Robots are doing two totally opposite things at once. They're making us more equal in one way and more unequal in another, all at the same time. How on earth is that possible? Well, the way it happens comes down to two really powerful forces that the researchers uncovered. They call it shrinking tops and collapsing middles. Let's break down what that means. It all boils down to these two key mechanisms, and they're both happening simultaneously to create this strange, contradictory result. So first up, the shrinking top. Think about it. Inside one particular job, robots make a lot of the work more standardized. This means those special skills that allow the most experienced, highest-paid workers to earn a premium, well, they become less valuable. So their wages actually get squeezed down, closer to what everyone else is making. The pay scale literally compresses from the top down. So inequality goes down, but not because the lowest paid are getting a raise, it's because the highest paid are taking a hit. And then you have the second mechanism, the collapsing middle. Now this is the part of the story we're all more familiar with. When you look at the gaps between different jobs, robots are hitting those middle-wage routine jobs the hardest. Like that assembler we talked about. This hollows out the middle of the job market, and it pushes the pay scales of different occupations further and further apart. And the researchers themselves sum it up perfectly in their paper. They say, robots exacerbate wage polarization while reducing the rents of the highest-paid workers in the occupations most vulnerable to automation. So you see both of those forces, clear as day, right there in their own words. So let's put all these pieces together. What does this actually mean for the future of work? What's the final verdict on our robot inequality puzzle? Well, here's the solution to our puzzle. The simple idea that robots just make us more unequal, it's not the whole story. What's really happening is this crazy dual effect. Robots are actually shrinking the pay gap inside a specific job, but at the same time, they're blowing up the pay gap between different jobs. And it all happens because of that 1-2 punch, squeezing wages at the very top of a profession while knocking out jobs in the middle of the economy.
Now, here's a final thought. This research was all about industrial robots, the ones in factories. But the next wave of automation is here. AI is starting to target routine knowledge work. Think paralegals, financial analysts, maybe even some coders. So the big question now is, are we going to see the exact same pattern play out? Will we see the pay gap for top-tier lawyers start to shrink while the gap between a lawyer and, say, a plumber grows even wider? That is the brand new puzzle we all need to start watching.